Hello, dear friends. It's day 7 of how to finish your novel in 10 days. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you could check earlier on this Facebook page. I have a video on day 3, or on my YouTube page. If you look up Nicholas Kotar on YouTube, you'll find it, where I talk about days 1 and 3. Initially, I had planned and wanted to make this into a daily video thing for obvious reasons, which I'm going to get into. That didn't happen. And so it's been 4 days since I've last talked about this crazy sprint that I've decided to do. Day 7, and let's get to it immediately. It's been a bad few days in terms of actually getting words on a page. It's been pretty bad. So I'm going to be honest with you all. When I decided to do this, the intention was to put my back against the wall and to force myself to actually put words on paper. Because as it turns out, I had been, for a reason that I will talk about in a second, but I had been not only not prioritizing my writing, but I had been unconsciously or subconsciously putting it on the bottom of the priority list for every single day's work. And those of you who have read my book might not like to hear that, those of you who've been waiting for this book especially. But I think there's a reason for that. I think that it has to do with the fact that it's two reasons. One is that the initial energy to get over the resistance, as I talked about last time, is sometimes quite significant when you're forcing yourself to actually get down and start writing a novel that's going to go on for a while. The other thing is that when I'm in a state where the words are coming, and like I said before, it's easier and easier for me to get to that stage, then I get a lot of enjoyment from the process. A lot. So much so that sometimes it feels more like playing than it does like work. And I'm a guy that's been has been trained, whether purposely or not, to expect and assume that work needs to be painful. And if it's giving me so much pleasure, as a good writing day does, then there must be something wrong with this as a kind of work. Therefore, it must be placed lower on the scale of priorities, because it can't possibly be all that good for me like some other things that are more spiritually beneficial, shall we say. So I've been shooting myself in the foot. And what ended up happening over the last few days is that, since that is the reality, and me forcing myself to try to get as much done, hopefully finish the book within 10 days as a kind of mechanism to really, really push myself forward, with that background to that mechanism, the problem is that as soon as regular life starts to get in the way, and by regular life, I mean things that are slightly more unusual than regular. I mean things like people getting sick, or miscommunications between family members, where one family member plans something and leaves the house during a time when I'm supposed to be working. These things happen a lot. They happen all the time. But when they happen in a concentrated form during a sprint where I'm trying to get as much work done as possible to get this thing done, then inevitably some things are going to just collapse and kind of go up in smoke. Now, I don't want to make it sound like I'm making excuses. My point is that I set myself this task knowing it would be difficult, and it's been more difficult than I expected. That being said, I've written more over the last week than I have in the last 4 months. So I hadn't realized how bad it had gotten, because I've been writing a lot, just not this novel. I've been writing plenty of stuff. I've been writing blog posts. I've been writing short stories. I've been writing screenplays. I've been writing a script for a new podcast that's going to be coming out soon. Plenty of stuff. But when it came to book 5, I was like, oh, no. I need to feel perfect for it to happen. I need to be in a perfect state of mind. And of course, that perfect state of mind must be forced. It must be manufactured. You can't just wait for it to happen. So I've been putting it off. So there's already a good positive thing that's happening from this 10-day sprint. I'm nowhere near where I wanted to be. That's for sure. I'm about 15,000 words behind, which for those of you who know, that's a lot. But today I got my first 5,000 word day in over 2 years. So something's working. So basically the first few days I was warming up. I had a headache that threw away one of the days entirely. I had a migraine. Then I started to get back in rhythm, and then came the weekend with its usual distractions, and so I kind of fell off the wagon. But today, I got back on it, and I had a massive writing day, and it was really good. And I wanted to tell you about one thing that happened. So, one of the tricks that that some writers, especially when they've been writing for a while, do to themselves is if they don't want to be too detailed in terms of planning the story out. There's different ways of approaching storytelling, especially novel writing. You could either really write a really detailed outline, like some authors do, so that you know exactly where the story is going and you have a good sense of the end and you have a good sense of where the scenes are and all this sort of thing. That can be a little bit stifling for some people, especially for someone like me who writes a lot on emotion. Thank you, Noah. But so what I usually do is I have a good sense of where I want to go generally, but without a real specific sense of an outline of scenes. And I have a good sense of the ending, and I know exactly where I am right now. But I know that within that, between the point where I am now and the end, there's going to be some situations where I write my characters into really bad corners, really stressful situations that they can't get out of. Apparently. Now, the real trick here, of course, as a fantasy writer, is not to give them some sort of magical MacGuffin to be able to get out of those situations magically, because that ruins all sense of danger, of suspense, and it's a particular temptation for fantasy writers. Let's be honest, and sci-fi in some cases. So I want to avoid that as much as possible, but I also don't want to avoid sometimes the situation of writing my characters into corners that I don't expect, because then I have to figure out the most logical way for them to get out, and it ups the suspense, and it really makes for some really interesting and unexpected surprises. So this happened today. I knew that I was going to have a difficult day writing today. Not difficult in terms of putting words down on a page. I was hoping that wouldn't be the case. But I knew that I would have some difficulty in getting one of the characters out of a particularly nasty situation. So instead of trying to figure out in advance, like I do sometimes, my wife is being lovely. She's preparing a crown for me for a hard day's work. Anyway, so instead of trying to figure out in advance how I'm going to get him out, I started to just write the resolution of the scene and let my fingers kind of take me where they would go. And a really weird thing happened. I figured out a major plot twist as my fingers were typing. I hadn't figured out in advance. I didn't know it was going to come. And it's something that really ties together a few aspects of the novel in a really interesting way, including some things that I had already written. So apparently there's been something in my subconscious mind that's been suggesting that this is the direction that I should be going. And I've been writing to it already. So sometimes you'll hear writers tell about the fact that you learn some things about your story as you write, and then in the revision stage, you'll go back and put in foreshadowings, things like this, to make sure that the reader isn't jolted during certain revelations. But what sometimes happens, if you're really lucky, and boy, was I lucky today, is that there's been things that you've put in without realizing that you've put in the early parts of the draft that then blossom in ways that you don't even expect later on in the draft, that really tie together certain elements that you didn't even realize were tied together. This happened to me a few weeks back, where I felt like I had to cut out a 3,500 word scene that I had put in a lot of effort into, and I really liked the scene, but it didn't seem to fit the larger story. Then, a few days later, I realized that the scene that I was describing didn't fit because I hadn't written the scene that would make it fit yet. And then I did, and the whole thing fit, so I put it right back into the story at an earlier point, which was a really great thing because that meant the story was longer than at that point than I expected. So I was farther along than I thought, which was a pleasant experience. Anyway, the part of the problem and part of what I'm discovering about myself, and part of what I'd like to share with you all, and I think it might be useful to some of you, is something that is an inherent problem that for a lot of freelancers and for a lot of people who do some sort of creative work that includes self-imposed deadlines. Anything that doesn't have somebody standing over you forcing you to do it. The issue with that kind of work is that if you don't have somebody standing over you, you're your own boss. It's difficult to force yourself to go and actually do the work. So, and that's certainly the case for me. And to help myself, I've read a lot of self-improvement literature, things by Michael Hyatt or something like Atomic Habits by James Clear, really good book. That a lot of these self-improvement kinds of books have some really great tips and strategies. Some of them even have attached products like the Full Focus Planner, which I use, Michael Hyatt's Full Focus Planner, which I really love, and it's helped me a lot. The problem is that a lot of this self-improvement literature has an inherent problem to it, is that it can only get you to a certain point. And it can only get you to a certain point. It can't actually fix all of your problems for you, because all of this self-improvement literature is basically written as though humanity were lab rats that exist only in idealized circumstances that don't actually include the pitfalls of parenting, the pitfalls of just having a bad day, or just the pitfalls of just regular normal life. Some of them do try to deal with that sort of thing, but still most of their solutions to the freelancer's problem have to do with setting up good systems. But good systems are only as good as the person who uses that system. And if the person who uses that system is prone to temptations, and I use the word temptations on purpose, I'm going to explain why. Or if that person is constantly falling to the same sort of self-imposed destructive behaviors, then no amount of good systems are ever going to get him out of it. Because the issue here is one of self-discipline. And that's a word that a lot of the self-help and self-improvement literature really doesn't like. Because it involves the tricky reality of temptation. And temptation has to involve the reality of there being as I mentioned last time, a possibly malevolent force getting up and getting in your way every time you sit down to do something useful and potentially beneficial for others, even if that's fiction. And I honestly strongly believe that. It's not just the resistance or the temptation to not work is not merely a physical reaction. Honestly, I believe that sometimes there are, malignant forces getting in the way of you or me sitting down and doing good, useful work for the benefit of ourselves and for the benefit of others. Interestingly enough, I found some really good stuff about self-discipline and about temptation specifically in a book that I've already mentioned. This is The Freelancer's Survival Guide by Christine Catherine Rush. And I say it's interesting because Christine Catherine Rush is not in any way, shape, or form somebody prone to mystical or religious talk at all. She's not religious in the least. She's very practical, and she writes very much in the sort of self-improvement vein. Except she's also very realistic and very honest about the realities of the human condition. How odd is that? And she has a great line that really resonated with me and got me to sort of refocus my entire approach to the 10 days in a way that hopefully will make it more productive for the remainder of the sprint. She said that the discipline is not about forcing yourself to improve. And that certainly is the way that I oftentimes treat self-discipline, as a kind of top-down forcible thing that includes a lot of guilt. Like, oh, how pathetic you are. Why aren't you doing this thing that you know you can do? What's wrong with you, sort of thing. She said, no, that's not discipline. Discipline is not about forcing yourself to improve. It's about wanting to get better. It's about having the desire to actually improve yourself. That's the only way it's going to work. If you don't have the desire to improve yourself, then no amount of external forces are ever going to force you to actually do the work well. You'll always wiggle out, unless, of course, you're in absolutely exigent circumstances and this is a job that you absolutely must have to do. And that's not the case here for me. This is an externally imposed deadline that I'm using in order to really force my process to move forward in a way that's going to be healthy and productive and sustainable for the long term. So she doesn't just stop there with that great quote. She also goes on to explain how you might develop self-discipline for yourself as a freelancer, so as somebody who works for yourself, as somebody on whom your family depends to make money, seemingly out of thin air. And so she really has some really great steps that I wanted to share with you today as a kind of capstone to day 7. She says, there are a few thoughts about how to do self-discipline. Number 1, define what you want to achieve. Not other people's goals for you. Not what your parents want, or what your spouse wants, or what other authors might want, or what you imagine other people might want you to want. No, what do you want? And how badly do you want it? Will you die disappointed if you don't achieve it? Will you feel like a failure? Or will you shrug and move on to the next thing? And this is a real issue. I, for a long time, haven't really faced for myself the reality of what it is that I want from my own fiction. And after doing this for a few days, in an intense way that I haven't been doing for a long time, it's becoming more and more clear to me that this is that I feel a real calling to do this, that I feel a real sense of fulfillment when I'm doing this. So hopefully that means I'll be able to continue at this breakneck pace that I'm doing right now. Second thing she says that you should do if you want to work on self-discipline, or if you want to become disciplined, is make a list of the things that get in the way of your achievement. If everything you list comes from the outside, then you have another problem. Sometimes authors say I can't get published because the publishing industry is impossible to crack, or because I need an agent, or because nobody wants to buy my books, or I can't figure out how to market them properly. Those are all outside excuses. That's not important, not for this self-discipline exercise. I mean, what part of you gets in the way? What are you doing to block your own success? How do you change that? For me, this was putting writing number 3 on the list of priorities, and I usually try to limit my major projects per day to 3 things to do, and I always put writing third. Even if I write it in the number 1 section, I always, almost always, used to schedule it third. So I would get through an entire day of excellent work and get to about 4 or 5 p.m. And the prospect of facing the resistance before getting to the state of flow, more often than not, is the thing that says, well, I'll do it after dinner. Of course, after dinner, I don't do it. So there you go. The third thing you should do is change your thought patterns. When you decide to go full-time freelance, you have to realize that your hobby has just become your job. So treat it like a job. That realization alone will take time. Then figure out how to make your freelance work a priority in your own mind. Apply patterns from your day job to your freelance work. Ask questions like this. What makes you get up and go to your day job every morning? What made you stay there? What made you work on days when you felt crummy? What made you work on days when you had somewhere better to go? And so on. Because you need to ask and answer those questions for yourself if you're going to be able to sustain a freelancing kind of life, which includes writing fiction to sell to people online. Some people write when they put deadlines on themselves. Other people need to have the deadlines imposed by others. For myself, I haven't yet figured out. I'm trying the self-imposed deadline, but judging by the last few days, not today, but Saturday and Sunday being almost entirely lost in terms of actually putting words on the page, I'm not entirely sure if self-imposed deadlines work for me, except I think I probably just have to bite the bullet and actually put book 5 into pre-order. Because if there's that date on Amazon and I don't meet it, I'm going to actually get punished by Amazon and lose my pre-order privileges for a year. I've had that happen to me once already, and I don't want for it to happen again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait until day 10 of this sprint, see how far I get. I think what will happen is I will get to about the 80,000 word mark by the end of the sprint, which is not going to be the end of the novel. The novel is probably going to be closer to 100,000 words. But if during these 10 days I don't burn myself out, but instead manage to really figure out and establish a routine that I know is sustainable, and a routine that includes up to, at this point, 5,000 words a day, which, for reference, somebody was saying on the radio recently, I don't remember what I was listening to, it must have been a podcast, where Zadie Smith, New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning Zadie Smith, was talking about flow state, and how when she's really writing well, she'll start writing in the early morning, and then suddenly it's the evening news, and she's been writing the whole day and hasn't noticed, and voila, there are 4,000 words of her new book written. I'm like, wait a minute, you wrote the entire day and you got only 4,000 words? So, hey, I can write faster than Zadie Smith people, so that's good. So maybe I can actually make it to 100,000 not long after day 10. In any case, I've got myself a slight out. I have an excellent editor who has agreed to edit this thing piecemeal. So if I'm not able to finish by day 10, I will do a full prostration before all of you, and I will continue to write. And hopefully it'll be done by perhaps day 12, day 15, day 17. But it will happen. This thing is going. It's flowing. There are characters from books 1, book 3, appearing all over the place. It's one big happy party, and the world is ending. But you didn't get it from me. And it's going into some really interesting and unexpected places. I think it's going to be a lot of fun for you all to read. I'm having a lot of fun writing it. So anyway, that's day 7. I'm not sure if I'll be able to come out tomorrow night for day 8, and probably don't want to see me every day anyway. But that's my update for now. Things are looking up. Things are looking good after a few difficult days, and I think I think it's gonna be okay. So I'm excited. I'm gonna go to bed now to hopefully get a good night's sleep and get up bright and bushy-tailed to throw down another 5,000 or more words. Perhaps we can get up to 6,000 tomorrow. Shall that be the teaser for tomorrow? Let's hope. All right, everybody. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.